Our talk this morning, what is our purpose and vision? And I feel personally like this part of the talk is a bit more loosey-goosey, if you know what I mean. It's not as clear, and it is because that is often the nature of purpose and vision. Often purpose and vision comes to us and it leaves with it a lot of question marks. Maybe something is clear, but maybe there's a lot of things that aren't clear, and there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered. It's just the nature of ministry. The big purpose. It is very difficult for us to find a specific purpose in Christian ministry if we don't have God's big purpose clear in our hearts and minds. We need to start with God's purpose and not start with our own. If we start with our own purpose and we ignore God's purpose, we are like this great football team that goes out and they form a team and they win a couple state championships, but God doesn't care. That's pretty pointless. Okay? If your church plant is the equivalent of a football team winning a state championship, okay, go do it and have fun, but don't call it Christian ministry. Okay? So what is God's big purpose? God's big purpose has to do with getting people together in good relationships with each other in worship of Him. Right? I in them, that they may be one as the Father and the Son are one. That's what Jesus prayed for. That's his heartbeat and his passion. You know, you can often tell what people are really want and what they're really excited about by what they pray about. You care about what you pray about. And what you don't care about, you don't pray about. I haven't prayed about football games. I don't care. We play ice hockey. I'm kidding. Right, Clifford? No. What we really are passionate about and what really burdens us and what really motivates us, we pray about. Well, what really motivated Jesus and what was he really passionate about? It's what he prayed about. And he prayed to the Father that we would be one and that we would be in him and that he would be in us. Unity and diversity in community for eternity. Because the church that is started here today goes on beyond the grave, and it goes on into glory, and it exists for eternity. Read the book of Revelations. We get to read the last chapter. We get to see where this is all going. The question is, are we joining him now? And are we showing others that they too can join him? I just think the concept of Christian ministry, the concept of church plants, the concept of outreach, even the concept of going to your home church on a Sunday morning becomes really pointless at some point if we miss the big picture, if we miss what this is all about. I think, sadly, too many conservative Anabaptist churches are filled with people that are going to church on Sunday mornings because, well, it's what we do, and they're not thinking about why. They're not thinking about the big picture. They're not thinking about the fact that they, as a mere mortal, get to worship the Almighty God and live and walk in his presence. That they've been invited into a relationship with him. That they've been called out of darkness and into light. Oh, it's the best thing that ever a human could experience. Get the big picture. And are we joining him? Many ministry ventures start because somebody has an idea, and ideas are good. God uses ideas. So let's start with the big why. Often a purpose for a ministry team going somewhere and doing something, it can be very varied, quite varied. Sometimes the purpose is veiled. We don't really see exactly what we're there to do, but the passion is evident, and that was clear in Chester's talk this morning. Chester's passion and calling is very clear. Like, a group of 40 men got up and confirmed it and laid hands on him and said, "Go and God be with you." Like, that's pretty clear that that should happen. And Chester, just God bless you. Even though the exact reason and purpose and program and process is very unclear, the passion, the calling, the vision, the greater purpose of joining God in His work, that is very clear. Keep that clear. Don't ever lose sight of that. The program, the what we will do, the when we will go, the who will go with us, the budget, the oversight, that can follow. That will become evident as we engage in the bigger purpose. The underlying reasons to form a ministry team are often not very spiritual sounding. And sometimes, because they're not very spiritual sounding, they're not discussed at all. They're just ignored. And we're going to talk about some of those things. The objective is to discover those things, to surface those things, and that will help us minimize surprises down the road. So we're going to talk about some boring practical considerations. And many of you know this stuff way better than I do, but there are practical considerations of economics. How do you move from, I'm going to pick on Elkhart County, Indiana, that's where I grew up. How do you move from there to some place that doesn't have an agricultural economy or an industrial economy and make a go of it financially? What if the place you go to, 75% of the people are on some form of social assistance? How do you fit into that? That's what we did when we moved to Northern Ontario. What if the lifestyle isn't about hard work? What if the lifestyle is about sipping tea on the front porch at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? That's not really Northern Ontario, but there's places like that. What if the lifestyle is like some island in the Caribbean where people just, I don't know what they do. I mean, go fishing, eat fish, go fishing. What does church planting look like? Don't those people need the gospel too? Yes, they do. What does family life look like where you're going? Is family very dysfunctional? Is there a lot of broken homes? Or is family maybe me and my aunt and uncle and my grandparents and my parents and my siblings and my cousins? Like, that's family. Or is where I'm going, family is my wife and I and our children? What does family mean? It's different in different places. What does outreach look like? These are considerations, thoughts to think, conversations to have, discussions to explore, and it's definitely not the same in every place. Church planting is not a cookie cutter activity. It is going with the giftings that God gave you, the calling and the passion that He placed on your heart, and to mesh that in with wherever He's called you. Sometimes we, as conservative Anabaptist people, think a lot about the economic considerations, like is land cheap there? That's a real question that people ask. Should they ask that, Alan? Okay, that was clear. It's like, we shouldn't even think about that. Well, I'm here talking about it. I just think I've heard people talk about it, and Alan is here saying people shouldn't even consider that. Okay, so we've dealt with that one. What about business opportunities? Should they be discussed? Who's going to put the beans on your bread and in your bowl where you live when you do this church plant? Is Ascending Church going to provide everything? Are you going to be self-supporting? At some point, you're going to have to decide. And you say, well, God will provide. Well, He will. And He will also expect you to make some decisions in that process. Okay? Somebody is going to have to decide. Is this about professional opportunities? Like moving into a big city, there are maybe more opportunities for Christian professionals in big cities than there are in maybe very rural areas. That can be a big stretch for some conservative Anabaptist people. It can be a big stretch. I heard Jason talk about how there's kind of an explosion of college attendees among our circles, and that creates a platform by which you could go to a city and you can witness to your fellow doctors, and you can be salt and light and provide a Bible-following, Jesus-believing, Jesus-following church among a group of medical professionals. But you have to be a medical professional to do that. Not to do it well, I would suggest. So these are things to think about. Other lifestyle considerations, like we have to think about climate, like who's ready to move. This summer, I'm supposed to go to this place in Nunavut. It's called Igloolik. Have you been there? Okay, it's only 200 and some miles north of the Arctic Circle. They mostly eat walrus and fish and seal, and it snows every month of the year. And there's a short span in the very middle of the summer when you can take your boats around the ice chunks. It's kind of cool. You want to move there? They're looking for pastors. But everybody's saying no, because you don't like 60 below. There's no palm trees. In fact, there's no trees. Well, somebody should go. Maybe you're thinking about Tahiti, palm trees. Maybe you're thinking about Jamaica, palm trees. Maybe you're thinking about inner cities with a park next door, and you don't have much of a yard, and your children go and they play in the park with all the neighborhood children. What about access to groceries and goods? Are you going to think about that? You're going to have to think about that. In Igloolik, milk costs $15 to $18 a gallon. A bottle of Dr. Pepper, which I indulge in every now and then, is $7 or $8. Garbage can that you would have in your kitchen that costs $3 at your local Dollar General costs maybe $40 or $50 there. Who's going to pay for that? Oh, and there's a lot of things that you can just go buy at Dollar General that you just can't go buy there. It just doesn't exist. Do you need to think about that stuff? Yes. At some point, it needs to be thought about. Family considerations have to do with things for your children, and I was really glad there was a session here about raising children in urban environments. My wife says that actually applied to us living in the bush, and so somebody talked about the right things there. My hat's off to you. What about your teenage children? What are they going to do? Who are they going to associate with? Are they going to get jobs? Who are their friends? What about their education? Are you prepared to homeschool your children? Are you prepared to coach them through going through the public school education system that's there? Are you going to start a Christian school for the community? There's many options. And I'm not here to say one is right and the other is wrong. I'm here to say somebody's going to have to make some decisions. Jason said this morning that novices focus on strategies and experts focus on logistics. Is that what you said? I think we're talking about logistics here. These are practical considerations that somebody needs to think about, whether it's a sending church, whether it's the individuals going themselves, probably a mixture of all the above. Now, we are doing this because we have a heart and a burden for people. Now, the people we're going to, the question is, are there people there? I sometimes get very jealous of my friend Alan Roth here. He lives in New York City, and on the other side of his block is another million people, and the next block over is another million people. And I'm like, that looks so easy to see people. At least a crowd. Now, maybe it's not, I know it's not easy, It's hard. It's a different kind of hard. But where I live, I want to have coffee with one of my best indigenous friends. Here's what I'll have to do. I'll have to check the weather today for tomorrow. And tomorrow, I'll have to go get the airplane out, and we'll have to fuel it up, and we're going to put in $1,500 worth of gas in the airplane. And then we're going to, if the weather is still nice, we're going to go on an hour-and-a-half flight, and we'll fly past 4 or 5 communities, and those communities will each have anywhere from 200 to 1,000 people. And then we'll get to this community, and he'll pick me up in his truck, and we're going to go have a talk. And if the weather didn't go bad, I'll be home for supper. It's incredibly rewarding. And that $2 coffee, it's not $2 coffee. It's different. Where is God calling you? Are you going to a place that has a lot of people? Is there a specific ethnic group that God is calling you to? Like Chester's talk this morning, we're down there and we're saying, okay, well, is it this kind of Muslim people, this kind of Muslim people? I'm going, to me, it's like they're all the same to me, but I just don't know. Well, I can take you to Northern Ontario, and I say, well, we're talking about the Cree people and the Ojibwe people and the Inuit people. They're not all the same. It's kind of like going to Pennsylvania and thinking that all the Mennonites are the same. They're not. And me coming from Indiana, that's a mistake I've made. I always think, oh, Pennsylvania Mennonites, okay. Well, they're not the same when you ask them. Well, in whatever place God is calling you to, the people aren't all the same, especially not if you ask them, and I would encourage you to ask them. What's unique about your people group? What are you proud of in your tribal culture? Because even though our cities are urban establishments, what they really are is they're full of tribal groups. I mean, at the end of the day, you still have Scottish and Welsh people that aren't really getting along. And you have Irish people that, well, Protestants and Catholics, they're still skirmishing. You have all kinds of people of color who, to me, it's just like, but you ask them and they know. I think it's important that we ask what's important to you, get to know their culture. At the end of the day, though, all tribal groups, all people groups need to hear the gospel. Jesus says that we're to make disciples of all nations. All nations. Some people roughly translate that as into people groups, not just geographical boundaries on a map. So it might matter whether the person we're talking to is Kurdish or Yazidi or Arabic or Afghani or Bengali, or that's about all the names I know. There's more, I'm sure. But it matters. And it's not about pitting these groups against each other, but it's about really getting people to understand the gospel in the language of their heart and have an understanding that Jesus came for our people too. Some outreach considerations. This is a generic theme, and I think those of you that have a lot of outreach experience understand that we kind of need to be open to two approaches. And the first approach is that we need to go to people. We need to see them in their homes. And if we're not willing to step into their homes, what will be the motivation for them to step into ours? I just think that's just how it works. I am probably much more likely to come see you again after you've seen me. For a person who is coming to Christ, there is a spiritual thing that's happening where God is working in their hearts and He's speaking to their soul, their conscience. There's also a relational thing that's happening between Christ's followers and those individuals. And I think it was Gandhi that said, following Christ wouldn't be so bad if it wouldn't be for the Christians. Something to that effect, okay? So we got some work to do on our relating to individuals who are maybe close to the kingdom but aren't quite there. We need to build relationships that matter. That might mean conversations, friendships. It might mean birthday parties. Yes, birthday parties can be evangelistic events. And obviously it needs to be more than a birthday party at some point. But yet, relationship building becomes the bridge across which people come to Christ. Now, a friend of mine, one of my closest friends, when I first met him in 2006, or 2007, I think it was, maybe in the spring of 2007, we visited in his community. We sat around a campfire. We roasted hot dogs. We had a decent conversation. At the end of the conversation, he says, it's like this. Someday I'll be a Christian again, but next time it's going to be when I decide. Ooh. All right. It was kind of like, you're a nice guy, but let's not go any further than that. Well, years went on, and we stayed in their house, and they stayed in ours, and our children played with each other. And one day when I was busy getting ready for a seminar much like this one, the day before the seminar, airplane broke down. We needed to fix the airplane. I was now fixing the airplane while getting ready for the seminar. It was bad, okay? I was down to the wire. Get a phone call from him, and his wife said, meet me at Tim Hortons. We need to talk. I still had airplane parts scattered across the hangar, and the next day we were supposed to fly, and we were supposed to do a seminar. And I says, well, I can't. And I got in my truck to drive out from the airport over to Beaver Lake Camp to do, the important work there, the seminar. And on the way, I felt like God stopped me and said, Norm, the important work isn't Tim Hortons. All those good Christians at Beaver Lake Camp, they can take care of what's going on there. You got to go to Tim Hortons. I called up the people at the camp, and they did the seminar without me, and I went to Tim Hortons. And the airplane, well, it won't fix itself, but it's not going to run away on its own either. So, go to Tim Hortons, wife, husband. He says, I'm ready. "10 years. 10 years of praying, 10 years of loving, 10 years of being kind, 10 years of wondering. Now, I'm ready." You see, we as Anabaptist people have always believed that following Christ is our choice, and it's made voluntarily and not under coercion or force. Read Harold Bender's book. That's the founding vision. If we want to be true Anabaptists, then that's where we leave the people that we minister to. But we live in such a way that it becomes a compelling reason for them to make that choice. And they make that choice because they really, really want to. It can be done. Outreach. A lot of things you can do to build those relationships. There's a lot of outreach ideas. This is just a small list. Anything from food banks to VBS to sports camps with children. There's gospel signs you see hanging up all over. There's ways to engage in public schools. There's public schools that are looking for guidance counselors for young people. Why can't those guidance counselors be Christians? Why can't they be conservative Anabaptist people? Why do they have to be homosexual activists? Our states are equal opportunity employers. They might as well hire Christians. Could be you. Now you get to do ministry and your bread is buttered too. Why are our prison chaplains not filled with conservative Anabaptist prison chaplains? Why are people not bumping into people like you and I when they go to jail? Nothing against a Lutheran chaplain. I mean, it's so much better than none. But there's no end to the desperate needs in the world, and they could be filled by people like you and I. Let's consider some strategies. Do we make progress by actively courting the outer edges of our large communities? In other words, where Elkhart County just keeps getting a little fuller and a little bigger and a little bigger, and then eventually some people spill over into, the next county, and then that grows over the next 100 years, and land prices go up, and so then people start to move a little further away. And maybe someday there will be conservative Anabaptist people in Chicago and in Fort Wayne. Is that the way it should be done? Some of you are shaking your head. You've already had this thought, haven't you? You've said, let's just go now, because we can. Thoughts to think. Why did we not make progress by actively identifying areas that are unchurched? And Brother Allgaier this morning did a great job of identifying areas where there's not much of a Christian witness. It's like a black hole on the map. Praise God that somebody's looking at that stuff and saying it. One of the benefits of multiplication of churches is that it gives young people leadership opportunities to develop their gifts. One of the most fun parts of my work is to see young people come from, great stable churches and families, and they come and they think, well, I'm just a cook or I'm just a mechanic. So I'm not a missionary that's going to do like outreach and stuff like that, but they come and they do mechanic work, and then the next week they're doing Sunday school, and the next week they're doing boys clubs, and at some point they're not just serving the snack at boys club, they're having the Bible lesson, and then at some point we say, hey, you want to preach on Sunday? No, that's like a preacher's job. I'm not one of those. And yeah, you got what it takes. It's like you can't really fail that bad. Why not try? And after they do that, they're like, I had no idea how much it would impact my own spiritual life to prepare a message and to deliver it. And they walk out with their head a little bit higher. And I hope and pray that they go home and their church ordains them. And they go plant a church somewhere else. I don't know what God will do with these young people, but they grow. Compare that with the alternative, to stay stuck in a church and lose vision because it's boring and there's nothing here for me to do. And then they find some excitement somewhere, and it's not good. A relative of mine was communicating with a young conservative Anabaptist boy who left his large conservative Anabaptist, well-established, well-known church. And he said, I had to get out because the other boys are doing cocaine and marijuana and drinking on Saturday night, and they're going to church on Sunday morning and having devotions and leading songs. Folks, we got a problem. Let's just say it. We got a problem. If that's what's going on in our churches, we got a problem. And it's because young people have not been properly drawn out, and their hearts haven't been made alive by the Spirit of God, and they haven't been directed into ministry. Instead, they have stagnated spiritually, and they've performed a religious rite. Deadness. The Bible calls it the Laodicean church. Just read it. It's not good, and it won't take us where we want to go. I think that providing young people with active ministry opportunities is a major antidote to that, and church plants can be a major part of that. Get these people out of their comfort zone. They have energy, they have vision, and God's talking to them. Give them a place where they can be obedient. Why are our inner cities burning holes of chaos with very little relevant Christian witness? Can we do better? I'd like to spend the rest of our time on the concepts between a short-term vision proposal and a long-term vision proposal. The last two slides. A short-term vision. I'm grateful that we can have honest conversation here about the differences between short-term and long-term vision. Many short-term visions are merely reactions to the last church that we attended. And if you're here this morning saying, I'm one of those people, I got burnt at my last church. My last church had these problems. That doesn't mean that God can't use you, but I would encourage you to deal with that as a separate issue rather than that being the only motivation to go do a church plant. Sometimes people want to do a church plant merely as a reaction to the last church they attended. I dare to say that is quite different from a Holy Ghost inspired calling and vision and passion for a specific city or a people group or something out there. Sometimes people want to do church plants because they don't like big churches and they want a small church. And we want to get out of Mennoniteville, USA, and we want to go into some where it's just us. Well, what are you going to do once it's no longer just us? What are you going to do once you have a little bit of success and there's 14 people that come to your church? Is that going to be too many then? Like, some of us are just loners, and so we want to do church plants because, well, then we get to be the only fish in the pond and we get to call the shots. It's not really a long-term sustainable purpose. Sometimes we want a church that lets its people do whatever they want to do, and we came from a church where we weren't allowed to do whatever we wanted to do, and now if we go have a church where we're in charge, we get to decide to do what we want to do. Well, what are you going to do once you're in this church and you get to make the decisions and you can let everybody do what they want to do? Now what? Once everybody's doing what everybody wants to do, is that the nature of the worship of Christ? No. You're going to be dissatisfied, and there'll be something else to bicker and fuss about, and then what? It's just not sustainable. Sometimes the church gets planted because at the last church, everybody was allowed to do what they want to do. We want to go create a church where there's some law and order and there's some strict guidelines, and we want real conformity, and we want to be really, really structured, and we want to get it right. And that sometimes is the motivation for a church plant. And, well, what are you going to do once everybody's walking the line and you really have the law and order that you crave? And what are you going to do then? Are you going to be satisfied? Or are you going to need to make new rules for people to follow so that you have more of a following of law and order? It happens. Churches start for these reasons. Well, I dare say that is also a short-lived, short-term vision. That is not the same as saying, that is not exactly the same as the worship of Christ. Sometimes a church gets started because, well, we want to stand for this, this, and this. And those this, and this become kind of the defining characteristics of this church group. And, well, what do you get once you get that? Now you've got it. Now what? I would like to propose to you that in all these short-term visions, it becomes very much a performance. I come and I perform. I go and I get it right. I go and I do. And if our life becomes all about I go and I do, there's something that is missing in our souls, in our spirits. Let's contrast that with a bit more of a long-term vision proposal, a sustainable vision proposal. What about creating a healing community in the town of, I don't know, you pick the town. Let's talk about Chicago. Chicago needs conservative Anabaptist witness in huge ways. Huge ways. There's Mennonites in Wisconsin. There's Mennonites in Illinois. There's Mennonites in Indiana. There's Mennonites in Michigan, and none in Chicago. Like, it's a big problem. Somebody ought to do something about it. So let's create a healing community in the town of, let's go specifically south central Chicago. Okay? And we want to draw people into a relationship with Christ. How long can those people have a relationship with Christ? Does it ever need to be done? No. It can be for now and eternity. If you want to draw people into a relationship with Jesus Christ, you have started something that never needs to end, and it's a job that's never done. It's an eternal value. It's an eternal vision. What about creating an environment that serves the community of, we're again going to pick on Chicago, by offering a faithful Christian witness? Will there always be people in Chicago that will benefit from a faithful Christian witness? I don't know how many millions of people are there, but there's a lot, and there's a lot that don't know Jesus. What about being a community of believers where the unity of the Godhead is experienced by its members? How long can you do that? Does that ever need to end? I don't think so. In these processes of a long-term vision, something happens inside us, and we come and we are changed. Apostle Paul talks about being changed from glory to glory. There's songs about that. That's the real Christian life, is a life of being changed. I see some gray hair here. Have you been getting changed for a while now, or did it all happen at once and then you were done? No, you're still getting changed? Okay, so younger people, I know you're awesome and everything, and very spiritual and sanctified, and Jesus has changed your life, and He's going to keep changing you. If you're really in a relationship with Him, that's what will happen. He might make you a bit more kind. He might make you a bit more insightful. He might make you a bit more compassionate and tender, and He might make you more open-minded. He might make you a bit more narrow-minded. I don't know what He'll do to you, but He'll keep changing you. And part of this is just like maturing, but being in a relationship with Christ means I'm Lord, I'm here, change me. Sometimes we think ministry is all about going to people and changing them. Well, what those people need is they need to see someone, a real human, that Christ is changing. And if they see and observe that, they're willing to say, well, maybe He could do that for me too. And that's the power of Christian community. That's the power of a godly example. It's the power of long-term relationships and vision. And I know it's not a flash-in-the-pan event, but I think it's real ministry. I think it's sustainable because it's real. It's also hard because it's real. A number of years ago, I think about 20 years ago, my wife and I were, no, not quite 20 years ago, 18 years ago, it doesn't matter. My wife and I were youth sponsors at our church in Indiana, and we were taking our youth group on a 1-week missions trip to Jamaica, and it's almost like that's too good to be true. Like, how do you get to go to Jamaica and call it ministry? And I remember we went on that trip, and I had done one short-term ministry trip before, but this is the second, and somehow we're supposed to be in charge of this thing, and I don't know what we're doing, and we get down there, and it's hot, and bugs, and I was trying to be happy, but it's hot, and we had to pour concrete, and And earlier, I had been in El Salvador on a house building project with Christian Aid a couple years before that. That was the other short-term thing I had done. And I remember how we had mixed concrete in El Salvador. And so now I'm supposed to be in charge of this project here in Jamaica. And they just did it completely different. I was like, no, this is how it's done. Like in El Salvador, we did it like this. Like, come on, like we're somewhere down south where it's hot and there's bugs, and so it should be the same here. Listen to me. And I remember like back and forth with this Jamaican guy, and I bet you that guy still remembers me. I don't remember his name. It's just that I'm embarrassed to this day because I was there with an agenda, and I had a plan, and I was the expert. The fact is, the agenda may be somewhat godly, maybe mostly not. The plan, God doesn't care how cement is mixed. God cares how I relate to the Jamaican man. And I blew it. I blew it bad. Since then, I don't know if God gave me that experience just to remind me of how bad I can get it sometimes. But the goal, if the goal is right from the beginning, to go and be changed as opposed to go and change others, maybe we can avoid some of those traps. If the goal is to go and fix people, go and change people, I just don't know how it'll ever turn out right. Because at some point, they're going to say, you know what? The next time I become a Christian, it's going to be on my terms. The next time if I become a Christian, the next time it's going to be when I decide to. Because somewhere my friend had been in an experience where he had been forced into Christianity against his own will, and he didn't like it, and he knew it wasn't real. So how can we represent the kingdom of God on earth? How can we live in unity, in harmony, in brotherly love, compassion, friendship? How can we be the kind of people that people want to come and be a part of us? It seems that Jesus, when he walked on this earth, he had a massive following at some points, and at some points everybody hated him, and at some points people abandoned him completely and denied his name. And a lot of that had to do with what people were getting out of it. When he was feeding them on the hillside, like 5,000 people is a lot of people. And he was the star of the show, and they wanted to kind of get him and make him king. And then like a day later, the multitude said, show us a sign that you are the bread of life. And he's like, well, didn't I just feed you? And they missed it. It wasn't long later that multitude mocked him and scourged him, abandoned him. So this thing of being in relationship with people isn't just about popularity. If it were just about popularity, we would have to conclude that maybe contemporary Christian musicians with thronging mobs of swooning fans is really where it's at. That's going to be kind of hard to sell that idea to conservative Anabaptist people. Should be hard, because I just don't think that's where it's at. I just don't think it's real. It's not about a fan club and a following. It's about really being in a real relationship with our Heavenly Father and with other people who are also in a relationship with Him. And about together we love Him. He redeemed us. And we can be in this thing together. That's the big vision. That's the big purpose. So.